I pulled into the familiar gravel driveway after 3 exhausting days at the marketing conference in Chicago, my mind still buzzing from successfully landing the Peterson account worth $200,000. The autumn evening cast long shadows across the suburban neighborhood where I had grown up, where I still lived, while saving every penny for a house down payment. But something was terribly wrong. Instead of seeing our welcoming front porch, 12 black garbage bags lined the wrought iron gate like sentinels of doom. My mother, Sandra, stood with her arms crossed, flanked by my younger siblings, Tyler and Madison, all wearing expressions of cold determination that made my stomach plummet into free fall. I stepped out of my Honda Civic, my legs trembling as reality crashed down around me. Sandra's voice cut through the October air like a blade dipped in poison. "You're 26 years old, Joe. Time to grow up and get out of my house." The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, searching her face for any trace of the mother who used to read me bedtime stories and bandage my scraped knees. Instead, I found only calculated cruelty. "What are you talking about?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I just got back from the conference. I closed the Peterson deal. I was going to tell you about the commission." Sandra's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Oh, we know all about your little success story. We also know you've been hoarding money while living here like some kind of parasite." My mind reeled. Parasite. I had been paying $800 in monthly rent, plus covering utilities that often reached another $200. I bought groceries for the entire family, handled all the yard maintenance, and had single-handedly replaced the roof shingles last spring when Sandra claimed she could not afford professional repairs. Tyler finally spoke up, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "Face it, Joe, you're too old to be living at home anyway. Madison and I need the space." I looked at my 24-year-old brother, who had been unemployed for 8 months, spending his days playing video games in the basement. Then I turned to Madison, 22, and working part-time at a clothing store in the mall, contributing exactly $0 to household expenses. "I don't understand," I whispered, walking toward the garbage bags. "What did I do wrong?" Sandra stepped forward, blocking my path to the house. "You did nothing wrong, sweetie. That's exactly the problem. You've been too comfortable here making your little nest while the rest of us struggle." The hypocrisy was staggering. I opened the first garbage bag and my heart shattered. My clothes were wrinkled and dirty, thrown together without any care. My books had pages torn and covers bent. But the sight that destroyed me completely was finding my grandmother's antique jewelry box in pieces, the delicate wood splintered, and the tiny ballerina snapped in half. "You broke Grandma Rose's music box," I said, holding the fragments with shaking hands. "Accidents happen when you're cleaning out junk," Sandra replied with zero remorse. In another bag, I discovered my personal documents scattered like confetti. Bank statements, tax returns, insurance papers. My privacy had been violated completely. Sandra had been monitoring my finances, tracking every deposit and withdrawal. "You've been spying on me," I accused, holding up a statement showing my growing savings account. "I've been looking out for my family's interests," she corrected. "You've been sitting on $23,000 while Tyler can't even afford gas for job interviews." The lie was breathtaking. Tyler had not been to a single job interview. He spent his unemployment checks on energy drinks and online gaming subscriptions. Meanwhile, I had been working 60-hour weeks, sacrificing social opportunities and personal relationships to build a future. "Where are my photos of Dad?" I asked, digging through more bags. Sandra's face hardened. "Gone. You don't need to cling to the past anymore." That was when I understood this was not about independence or responsibility. This was about jealousy. Sandra could not stand watching me succeed while she remained stagnant. She could not bear seeing me build the life she had always wanted, but never achieved. I found my laptop in another bag, the screen cracked and keyboard missing several keys. My professional portfolio was scattered throughout multiple bags, client presentations, mixed with dirty laundry and kitchen garbage. "You destroyed my work materials," I said, voice barely controlled. You can rebuild them at your own place, Tyler added with cruel satisfaction. The neighbors had started gathering. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her front porch with obvious concern. Mr. Rodriguez was watering his garden but clearly listening to every word. These people had watched me grow up, had seen me helping Sandra through Dad's illness and death 5 years ago. Sandra noticed the audience and raised her voice. Everyone makes their own choices in life. Joe chose to take advantage of family generosity instead of becoming independent. The manipulation was masterful. She was rewriting history for public consumption, painting herself as the victim and me as the ungrateful daughter. But I had learned something valuable during my years in marketing about reading people and situations. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, discreetly starting a voice recording. If Sandra wanted to play games, I would document every moment. I want my birth certificate, passport, and social security card, I said calmly. They're somewhere in the house. You'll have to come back for them later, Sandra replied dismissively. When? When I feel like looking for them. This was pure spite. She was holding my essential documents hostage, probably hoping I would beg and grovel for their return. Instead, I continued loading my belongings into my car with methodical precision. Tyler grew increasingly agitated by my composed response. Aren't you going to cry or something, fight for your place here? I looked at him with genuine sadness. Why would I fight to stay where I'm not wanted? You could at least act like you care about leaving us. Madison finally spoke, her voice wavering slightly. I do care, I replied honestly. That's why this hurts so much. Sandra had clearly expected tears, pleading, maybe even anger. My quiet dignity was disrupting her script. She had wanted drama to justify her actions to the neighbors and to herself. Fine then, she snapped. Take your things and go, but don't come crawling back when reality hits you. I closed the trunk of my car and turned to face my family one last time. Sandra stood with her chin raised defiantly. Tyler avoided my eyes, suddenly looking younger than his 24 years. Madison bit her lip clearly, having second thoughts about this plan. The final twist came when Sandra reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Since you're so determined to leave, you might as well know this was planned in advance. She handed me an official-looking document dated 2 weeks earlier, an eviction notice professionally typed and notarized. While I had been working late nights and traveling for business, she'd been consulting lawyers and planning my removal. You've been plotting this for weeks. I said, the full scope of the betrayal finally clear. Tyler needs your room and Madison is getting the garage converted into an apartment. Both rent-free, of course, since they're family. The message was crystal clear. They were family. I was not. I folded the eviction notice and placed it carefully in my purse, right next to my phone that was still recording every word. Sandra's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty as she realized I was not responding according to her expectations. That's it, she demanded. No fighting, no begging. I smiled, then a genuine expression that seemed to unnerve her more than any tears could have. I understand perfectly now. The truth was, I finally saw the situation with complete clarity. This was not about me being too old to live at home or failing to contribute enough. This was about Sandra's deep resentment of my success and her inability to face her own stagnation. She needed me to fail so she could feel better about her choices. Mrs. Patterson approached from her yard, her weathered hands twisting a dish towel. Joe, honey, is everything all right? If you need a place to stay tonight, Ralph and I have the spare room. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That's very kind, but I'll be fine. I replied, touched by her concern. This is a family matter, Sandra interjected sharply. Joe is simply moving out to become more independent. Mr. Rodriguez set down his garden hose and walked to the fence. Joe, if you need help moving anything heavy, just holler. This doesn't seem right to me. The support from neighbors Sandra barely spoke to was both heartwarming and telling. These people had observed our family dynamics for years. They knew who really maintained the property, who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries, who organized the annual block party that Sandra always took credit for hosting. I appreciate everyone's concern, I said, loading the last garbage bag into my back seat, "but I need to handle this myself." Sandra's agitation grew as she realized the neighborhood's sympathy was entirely with me. "Tyler, Madison, get inside. This drama has gone on long enough." But Tyler seemed frozen, finally grasping the magnitude of what was happening. "Joe, maybe we could work something out. Different arrangements or whatever." "It's too late for that." Sandra cut him off. "The decision is made." I reached into my purse and pulled out my spare house key, the one I had carried for 8 years, since moving back after college to help during Dad's illness. I placed it gently on the mailbox post. "You'll also want this," I said, pulling out a small notebook. "It's the maintenance schedule for the house. The furnace filter needs changing. Next week, the gutters should be cleaned before the first snow, and the driveway sealant needs another coat before winter. The water heater is making that noise again, which means the heating element is probably going bad." Sandra snatched the notebook like it was contaminated. "I can manage my own house, thank you very much." "Of course you can," I agreed. "You managed perfectly well before I moved back." The sarcasm was gentle but unmistakable. Before I had returned home, the house had been falling apart. The roof leaked, the plumbing constantly backed up, and Sandra had been 3 months behind on property taxes. Madison stepped forward hesitantly. "Joe, your car insurance. Aren't you still on our family plan?" I had forgotten about that detail. "I'll call them tomorrow and get my own policy." "And your health insurance through Mom's work," Tyler added, perhaps beginning to realize how many practical matters were about to become complicated. "I have excellent coverage through my job," I replied. "Actually better than what I had through Sandra's plan." Each practical question they raised only highlighted how much they had taken for granted. I was not just leaving emotionally, I was removing a significant support system they had never bothered to acknowledge. Sandra's phone rang and she answered with obvious irritation. "What do you want, Lisa?" I could hear Aunt Lisa's voice through the speaker, sharp with anger. "What do you mean you kicked Joe out? What kind of mother throws her daughter away like garbage?" "This is none of your business," Sandra hissed, stepping away for privacy. But Aunt Lisa was Dad's sister, and she had never been intimidated by Sandra's theatrics. "That girl has been holding your family together since Mark died, and you know it. She's the only one with any sense or work ethic." The conversation continued in heated whispers, but I could see Sandra growing more defensive and angry. Aunt Lisa had clearly heard about the situation through the neighborhood grapevine, which meant the story would spread through our extended family within hours. I finished loading my car and performed one final check of the bags. Everything I owned in the world now fit in a Honda Civic. 26 years of life reduced to whatever Sandra had deemed worth preserving in her hasty packing job. "This is really happening," Madison whispered, tears finally starting to flow. I walked over to her and gently touched her shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Madison. Make smart choices." She looked like she wanted to say more, but Sandra had finished her phone call and was watching us with hawk-like intensity. Tyler shuffled his feet awkwardly. "Maybe we'll see each other around town or something." "Maybe," I agreed, though I doubted it would happen anytime soon. I got into my car and started the engine, taking one last look at the house where I had spent my childhood and the last 5 years of my adult life. The blue shutters needed repainting, something I had planned to tackle next spring. The front garden beds were perfectly maintained because I had spent every weekend pulling weeds and planting seasonal flowers. Sandra stood in the driveway with her arms crossed, clearly expecting some dramatic final confrontation. Instead, I rolled down my window and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Sandra, I want you to know that I understand exactly why you're doing this. I hope you get everything you think this will give you." Then I put the car in reverse and drove away without looking back, even when Sandra started shouting threats about never being welcome to return. As I reached the end of our street, I realized I was not crying. Instead, I felt something I had not experienced in years, complete freedom from expectation and obligation. For the first time since Dad's death, I could make decisions based solely on what was best for me. The recording on my phone had captured everything: the cruelty, the manipulation, the calculated nature of Sandra's actions. But more importantly, it had captured my own dignity in the face of betrayal. Whatever happened next, I had documentation of exactly how this family dissolution had unfolded. I drove toward downtown, toward my future, toward a life where my value would not be measured by how much I could sacrifice for people who took that sacrifice for granted. The extended stay hotel on Fifth Avenue was clean, affordable, and blissfully quiet. I sat on the edge of the generic double bed, finally allowing myself to process what had just happened. The numbness was wearing off, replaced by a strange mixture of grief and relief. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Joe, it's Mrs. Patterson. Got your number from the neighborhood directory. Ralph and I are thinking of you. You have more family in this neighborhood than you know." The kindness of neighbors Sandra barely acknowledged brought the first tears of the evening. But they were not tears of devastation. They were tears of gratitude for unexpected support. I opened my laptop, grateful Sandra had not damaged it beyond repair, and began making practical lists. First priority, secure housing. Second priority, recover my stolen documents. Third priority, establish new financial independence. My phone rang, displaying a number I recognized immediately. Danny. "Joe, Aunt Lisa called me. She said Sandra threw you out and is holding your documents hostage. Is that true?" Danny was Dad's nephew, a family law attorney in Seattle. We had stayed in touch since Dad's funeral, bonding over shared memories and similar values. Every word I confirmed, then summarized the evening's events. "That's illegal," Danny said bluntly. "You are a legal tenant paying rent. She can't just arbitrarily evict you without proper notice, and she definitely can't withhold your personal documents." "What are my options?" "Well, you could sue for illegal eviction and theft of personal property. But honestly, Joe, do you want to be tied up in legal battles with your mother for the next 2 years? He had a point. Legal victory would be hollow if it meant months of depositions, court appearances, and continued contact with Sandra's toxic behavior. "What would you do?" I asked. "I'd document everything, file a police report for the stolen documents to create an official record, then focus on building the best life possible. Success is the greatest revenge." After hanging up with Danny, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the situation. Officer Martinez was sympathetic and professional, explaining that while family disputes were complicated, withholding someone's birth certificate and passport was indeed theft of essential documents. "We'll file a report tonight," he assured me. "That creates documentation if you need it later for legal purposes." Next, I texted my college friend Sarah, who lived in a trendy downtown apartment. "Emergency situation. Are you free to talk?" Sarah called within minutes. "What happened? You sound terrible." I explained the entire story, including Sandra's surveillance of my finances and the premeditated nature of the eviction. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally making sounds of disbelief and anger. "You can stay here as long as you need," she offered immediately. "I have that spare room I've been using for storage. We can clear it out this weekend." "I can't impose like that." "Joe, you're not imposing. You're accepting help from someone who cares about you. There's a difference." The distinction hit me hard. Sandra had spent years making me feel like any support I needed was an imposition while simultaneously taking my contributions for granted. Monday morning brought new possibilities. I arrived at work early, hoping to lose myself in familiar routines. But Patricia, my mentor and the senior marketing director, immediately noticed my subdued demeanor. "You look like you've been through a war," she observed over coffee. I found myself telling the whole story again, still somewhat shocked by the events myself. Patricia listened with the sharp attention she brought to all business problems, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You know, we have a relocation assistance program," she said when I finished. "It's designed for employees who need to relocate for work, but there's also an emergency housing provision for personal crises." I had no idea. "Most people don't because it's rarely needed, but the company has a partnership with several apartment complexes downtown. They can provide immediate housing with delayed payment options and moving assistance." Within 2 hours, I had filled out paperwork and received approval for both emergency housing assistance and a personal hardship loan against future commissions. The Peterson account I had closed was generating a commission of $12,000, more than enough to cover deposits and first month's rent. Patricia also connected me with Janet from HR, who helped me update all my employment records with new contact information and emergency contacts. "I'm removing Sandra from all your workplace records," Janet explained, "and I'm flagging your file so that no information about your employment can be shared with unauthorized parties." The efficiency was remarkable. In one morning, I had secured professional housing assistance, financial support, and privacy protection. The corporate structure I had always taken for granted suddenly felt like a safety net Sandra had never provided. That afternoon, I visited 3 apartment complexes recommended by the company program. The third one, Cedar Grove Apartments, felt perfect. The building was modern but warm, with a fitness center, community garden, and 24-hour security. "The one-bedroom units have great natural light," explained Melissa, the leasing agent. "And since you're part of the corporate program, we can waive the security deposit and prorate your first month." The apartment was beautiful. Hardwood floors, updated kitchen, large windows facing west toward the mountains. Standing in the empty living room, I could envision my life taking shape in this space. "I'll take it," I decided immediately. Back at the hotel that evening, I called Aunt Lisa to update her on the day's progress. She'd been Dad's confidant throughout his illness, and she understood Sandra's personality better than anyone. "Your father would be so proud of how you're handling this," she said warmly. "Sandra expected you to come crawling back within a week, begging forgiveness and promising to be more grateful. That's not going to happen." "Good. Mark always worried that Sandra was crushing your spirit. He wanted you to be independent and strong, not her permanent caretaker." The conversation with Aunt Lisa revealed something I had never known. Dad had been concerned about Sandra's increasing dependency on me and her resentment of my achievements. He had apparently spoken to several family members about his worries, creating a network of support I had never realized existed. "Uncle Robert wants to take you to dinner this weekend," Aunt Lisa continued, "and your cousin Emma has been asking about you since she heard what happened." These were relationships Sandra had quietly discouraged, claiming Dad's family was judgmental and interfering. Now I understood she had been isolating me from people who might have encouraged my independence. That night, I began documenting everything in a detailed journal, not for legal purposes, but for my own processing. I wrote about the financial contributions Sandra had minimized, the emotional labor she had taken for granted, and the dreams I had deferred to meet her demands. The exercise was revealing. Over 5 years, I had contributed more than $60,000 to household expenses, while receiving no equity in the property. I had sacrificed dating relationships because Sandra demanded my evenings be available for family obligations. I had turned down work opportunities that required travel because Sandra claimed she needed me nearby. But I had also enabled the dysfunction by never setting boundaries or demanding respect. The situation had not developed overnight. It had been building for years while I made excuses and hoped things would improve. My phone buzzed with another unknown number. For a moment, I feared it was Sandra calling from Tyler's phone or using some other method to bypass my contact restrictions. Instead, the text read, "Hi Joe, this is Marcus from the Peterson account team. Patricia mentioned you might need some local recommendations for furniture stores and restaurants. Happy to share some suggestions if you're interested." Marcus. I remembered him from the Chicago conference, tall and soft, spoken with an easy smile and genuine interest in marketing strategy. We had talked over dinner about the challenges of building client relationships in competitive markets. I typed back, "That would be wonderful. I'm starting completely fresh in a new place." His response came quickly, "Fresh starts can be exciting. Would you like to grab coffee this weekend and I can share my neighborhood guide?" For the first time in years, I could make social plans without checking Sandra's expectations or obligations. The freedom was intoxicating. "I'd love that," I replied. As I prepared for bed in the anonymous hotel room, I realized something profound had shifted. The devastation of being rejected by my family was transforming into excitement about possibilities I had never allowed myself to consider. Sandra had intended to punish me to force me into desperate dependence that would make me grateful for any scraps of acceptance she might offer. Instead, she had inadvertently freed me from a prison I had not even realized I was living in. Tomorrow, I would sign the lease on my new apartment and begin building a life based on my own values and choices. For the first time since Dad's death, the future felt full of potential rather than obligation. 6 weeks into my new life, I woke up in my apartment to sunlight streaming through windows I had dressed with cheerful yellow curtains. The transformation had been remarkable. My one-bedroom space now reflected my actual personality rather than Sandra's expectations. Modern furniture in warm colors, plants thriving on every windowsill, and books arranged by preference rather than hidden away. The coffee maker Marcus had recommended produced the perfect morning brew while I reviewed my schedule. Today marked another milestone, my official promotion to senior marketing specialist with a salary increase of $18,000 annually. Patricia had fast-tracked my advancement, citing my exceptional performance on recent accounts and my professional handling of personal challenges. "You've shown remarkable resilience," she had explained during my review. "The company values employees who can maintain excellence despite personal adversity." The irony was not lost on me. Sandra's attempt to destabilize my life had actually showcased strengths I had not known I possessed. My phone displayed a text from Marcus. "Dinner tonight at that Italian place we discussed. I have news about the Morrison account." Our relationship had developed naturally from professional collaboration to genuine friendship to something deeper. Marcus appreciated my independence and never made demands on my time or energy. After years of Sandra's constant emotional manipulation, his respectful approach felt revolutionary. "Perfect," I typed back. "I have news too." The news was my decision to start therapy with Dr. Jennifer Chen, recommended by my company's Employee Assistance Program. Our weekly sessions had been revelatory, helping me understand patterns of behavior I had accepted as normal. Children of narcissistic parents often become hyper-responsible, Dr. Chen had explained during our third session. They learn to anticipate and meet others' needs while suppressing their own. This creates a cycle where they attract people who exploit their caretaking instincts. The psychological framework helped me understand not just Sandra's behavior, but my own responses. I had been trained from childhood to measure my worth by how much I could sacrifice for others' comfort. My lunch break included a trip to the pottery studio where I had enrolled in beginner classes. The tactile experience of shaping clay was meditative and grounding. Sandra had always dismissed creative pursuits as frivolous hobbies for people with too much time. "Your bowl is really coming along," commented Rachel, the instructor. "You have natural spatial awareness." These small validations meant more than they should have. After years of having my interests minimized or ignored, discovering I had actual talents felt like uncovering buried treasure. The afternoon brought a disturbing phone call to my office. "Joe, this is Mrs. Patterson. I hope it's all right that I'm calling your work." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Is everything okay?" "Well, that's what I'm wondering about your mother's house. Ralph noticed the furnace repair truck there 3 days ago, and yesterday there was a plumbing company. Today it looks like someone is fixing the roof again." My stomach tightened. October in our region meant heating systems were essential, and the house's aging furnace had been on its last legs when I left. "Has Sandra said anything to you?" I asked. "That's the thing, dear. She's been telling everyone you abandoned them and left them in financial trouble. But Ralph calculated that it's been 6 weeks, and we've seen more repair trucks than in the previous 2 years combined." The implication was clear. Without my maintenance skills and financial contributions, the house was falling apart. Sandra was facing the reality of homeownership without someone else managing the responsibilities. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said carefully, "but I can't get involved in Sandra's household decisions anymore." "Of course not, honey. I just thought you should know people around here aren't buying her version of events." After work, I stopped by the hiking group meetup that had become a Tuesday evening routine. The Pacific Northwest offered incredible trails, and I had discovered a love for outdoor adventure Sandra had never encouraged. "You look different," observed Kevin, a software engineer who had become a good friend, more relaxed or something. "I feel different," I admitted, like I'm finally living my own life instead of someone else's expectations. The group included professionals from various industries, people who pursued challenges and adventures in their free time. Their stories of travel career changes and personal growth showed me possibilities I had never considered while trapped in Sandra's narrow worldview. During dinner with Marcus, he shared news about landing the Morrison account, a major client that would significantly boost his commission earnings. His excitement was infectious, but what impressed me most was his immediate thought about using the additional income to support his sister's college tuition. "Families should lift each other up," he said simply, "not tear each other down." I told him about Mrs. Patterson's call and the apparent crisis at Sandra's house. Marcus listened thoughtfully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Do you feel guilty?" he asked finally. "Sometimes," I admitted. I was trained to feel responsible for everyone else's problems, but logically, I know Sandra created this situation herself. What would happen if you tried to help now? The question forced me to think through the scenario. She'd expect me to fix everything while accepting no responsibility for what happened. Then she'd probably do something similar again once things stabilized. So helping would actually enable more harmful behavior. Exactly. Marcus nodded approvingly. My ex-girlfriend used to say I was heartless for not constantly rescuing my alcoholic brother, but his therapist explained that rescuing people from consequences prevents them from learning to manage their own lives. The parallel was illuminating. Sandra's financial crisis was not a random disaster requiring emergency intervention. It was the natural consequence of her decision to remove the person who'd been subsidizing her lifestyle. That evening, I received a series of text messages from unknown numbers. All contained variations of the same theme. "Joe, this is Madison. Mom says I can't use her phone to contact you, but I got a friend's phone. Things are really bad here. Can we talk?" Then, "Joe, Tyler here, using my girlfriend's phone. The water heater died and Mom doesn't have money for repairs. Could you maybe help just this once?" Finally, "Joe, it's Madison again. Mom doesn't know I'm texting. She applied for a second mortgage but got denied. The house payment is due tomorrow and she's freaking out." The manipulation was both transparent and predictable. Sandra was using my siblings as intermediaries, hoping emotional appeals from them would succeed where her direct demands had failed. I screenshot each message for my records but did not respond. Dr. Chen had been clear about this phase of the process. When narcissists lose their primary source of support, they typically escalate their attempts to regain control, she had explained. They'll use guilt, fear, anger, and proxy manipulation through other family members. Maintaining boundaries during this phase is crucial for long-term healing. Instead of responding to my siblings, I texted Aunt Lisa, getting messages from Tyler and Madison about financial crisis at Sandra's house. They're trying to pull me back into the caretaker role. Her response was immediate. "Stay strong, sweetheart. Sandra needs to face the consequences of her choices. Your siblings are adults who can make their own decisions about how much they want to help." The evening ended with me curled up on my couch with a book and a cup of tea, my apartment quiet and peaceful. No one was demanding my attention, criticizing my choices, or creating drama that required my immediate intervention. My phone buzzed one final time. Another unknown number. "Joe, this is Sandra. I know you're getting messages from your siblings. We need to talk like adults and work out a solution to this situation." The audacity was breathtaking. After 6 weeks of silence, she wanted to talk like adults, now that she needed something. The message revealed everything about how Sandra viewed relationships functional, when they served her needs, dispensable, when they required effort or compromise. I saved the message to my documentation file and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight I could simply enjoy the peace I had earned by refusing to be anyone's unpaid life manager. For the first time in years, I fell asleep without worrying about anyone else's problems or planning how to fix someone else's mistakes. The freedom was intoxicating. 3 months after my departure, Sandra's desperation reached a fever pitch that would have been comical if it were not so pathetic. The woman who had coldly calculated my removal was now frantically trying to locate me through every method she could imagine. My new phone number obtained through my company's security program remained blissfully private, but Sandra had apparently spent weeks trying to reach me through increasingly creative and invasive approaches. Aunt Lisa called Wednesday morning with an update that was both disturbing and enlightening. She showed up at my house yesterday demanding your contact information. When I refused, she accused me of turning the family against her. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that you're thriving in your new life and don't need the drama she brings. She didn't take it well. According to Aunt Lisa, Sandra had been systematically contacting every family member, every former friend, and every professional connection she could think of. Her story changed depending on her audience, but the core message remained consistent. I had selfishly abandoned my family in their time of need. She told your cousin Emma that you stole money from the house before leaving, Aunt Lisa continued. Emma just laughed and said that sounded like projection. The family grapevine had turned against Sandra in ways she clearly had not anticipated. Dad's relatives remembered who had actually been supporting the household, who had sacrificed career opportunities to provide care during his illness, and who had maintained their connections after his death. Uncle Robert said something interesting, Aunt Lisa added. He said Sandra's behavior reminds him exactly of her mother's manipulation tactics. Apparently, this runs in their family. That afternoon, Patricia knocked on my office door with an unusual expression. Joe, we need to discuss a security issue. My stomach dropped. What kind of security issue? Your mother has been calling our main number trying to get your direct extension. When reception explained they couldn't share employee contact information, she became verbally abusive and threatened to file complaints with corporate headquarters. The embarrassment was crushing. I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would involve my workplace. It's not your fault, Patricia assured me, but we've flagged her information in our system and informed security. If she shows up at the building, they'll escort her out immediately. Patricia's tone was professional but sympathetic. This kind of harassment unfortunately occurs more often than you might think. The company has protocols specifically for situations where family members become intrusive. The idea of Sandra actually appearing at my office was terrifying. My professional reputation had always been immaculate, built on reliability and discretion. Her potential for creating scenes could damage relationships I had spent years developing. What else should I do to protect myself? I asked. Document everything. Keep records of all contact attempts, especially anything that could be considered threatening or harassing. And consider consulting with legal counsel if the behavior escalates. That evening brought news from an unexpected source. Marcus had been approached by someone claiming to be researching local marketing professionals for a potential business partnership. She asked very specific questions about your background, your living situation, and your financial status, he explained over dinner. Something felt off, so I gave her generic professional information and ended the conversation. What did she look like? Marcus's description matched Sandra perfectly. She had apparently hired someone to investigate my personal life, probably hoping to find weaknesses she could exploit. This is getting scary, I admitted. I never thought she'd go this far. Have you considered getting a restraining order? The suggestion had merit, but I knew Sandra well enough to predict she would view legal action as an escalation rather than a boundary. Still, documenting her harassment was becoming essential. Friday brought the most disturbing development yet. Sarah texted me at work. Someone has been asking my neighbors about you. Mrs. Kim next door said a woman matching Sandra's description was asking when you come and go, what car you drive, and whether you live here permanently. The stalking behavior was escalating beyond phone calls and workplace harassment. Sandra was now conducting physical surveillance of my friends' homes, trying to track my movements and living situation. I called Danny immediately. She's crossed the line from harassment into stalking. Agreed, he replied grimly. You need to file a police report immediately and consider requesting a protection order. This behavior suggests she's becoming increasingly unstable. The police report took 2 hours and required detailed documentation of every contact attempt, every workplace call, and every incident of surveillance. Officer Williams was thorough and professional, explaining that family stalking was unfortunately common and often escalated without intervention. We'll flag her information in our system, he assured me. If she contacts you directly or shows up anywhere you're located, call us immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. That weekend, Uncle Robert invited me to dinner with several family members I had not seen since Dad's funeral. The gathering was both supportive and revealing. Sandra called me last week claiming you had stolen family heirlooms when you left, reported Cousin Emma. I told her I found that impossible to believe given your character. She tried the same story with me, added Uncle Robert. But I remember how you handled your father's estate. You were completely transparent about every decision and made sure Sandra received everything she was entitled to. The dinner conversation revealed the full scope of Sandra's campaign to turn family members against me. She had apparently spent months spinning elaborate stories about my selfishness, greed, and betrayal of family loyalty. But her strategy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of generating sympathy for her situation, her obvious lies had damaged her credibility and strengthened family support for my independence. Your father worried about this exact scenario, Uncle Robert told me privately. He saw how Sandra used guilt and manipulation to control people, and he was afraid she'd try to trap you in a permanent caretaker role. The revelation that Dad had anticipated Sandra's behavior was both comforting and heartbreaking. He had apparently tried to protect me through conversations with other family members, creating a support network that would activate if Sandra became destructive. Sunday evening brought the most desperate attempt yet. My apartment building's concierge called my unit. Ms. Joe, there's someone in the lobby claiming to be your sister. She says there's a family emergency and she needs to speak with you immediately. Through the security monitor, I could see Madison pacing in the lobby, clearly distraught, but also obviously coached. Her performance was theatrical, rather than genuinely emotional. Please tell her I'm not available and ask her to leave, I instructed the concierge. She's saying someone is in the hospital and you need to come home right away. The fake emergency tactic was predictable, but effective in creating doubt. What if something had actually happened? What if someone really was injured and needed my help? But I had learned to trust my instincts about manipulation. If there were a genuine emergency, official sources would contact me directly. Sandra would not send Madison to deliver such news. If there's a real emergency, she can contact emergency services or ask them to reach me through official channels, I told the concierge. Madison waited in the lobby for 40 minutes before finally leaving. The security cameras captured her making multiple phone calls, presumably reporting back to Sandra about the failure of this mission. That night, I sat in my apartment feeling simultaneously guilty and proud. Guilty for not rushing to help someone who claimed to need me. Proud for maintaining boundaries despite emotional manipulation. Dr. Chen had prepared me for this exact scenario during our sessions. Narcissists often create false emergencies to force contact when other methods fail. They're counting on your compassion and sense of responsibility to override your judgment. The pattern was becoming clear. Sandra had exhausted legitimate approaches and was now escalating to increasingly desperate and invasive tactics. Her behavior suggested someone losing control of a situation she had expected to manage easily. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Joe, this is Sandra. I don't know what lies people have been telling you about me, but we need to clear the air. I'm your mother, and I deserve at least a conversation. The entitlement in that single message revealed everything about Sandra's mindset. She still believed being my biological mother gave her unconditional access to my life, regardless of her behavior or my clearly expressed boundaries. I screenshot the message and added it to my growing documentation file. If Sandra continued escalating her harassment, I would need comprehensive evidence for legal protection. But more importantly, I realized I felt no emotional pull toward responding to her demands. The guilt and obligation that had once compelled me to sacrifice my own well-being for her comfort had been replaced by healthy detachment and self-protection. Sandra had spent months trying to force me back into the role of family caretaker. Instead, she had inadvertently proven how much healthier my life became without her toxic influence. 4 months had passed since that devastating October evening when I found my belongings in garbage bags. Now, as February snow blanketed the city, my life had transformed into something Sandra could never have imagined when she plotted my exile. My apartment had become a sanctuary of peace and personal expression. Plants thrived under grow lights my photography hobby had produced images worthy of framing, and the kitchen table Marcus had helped me pick out hosted regular dinner parties with friends who genuinely valued my company. But Sandra's world was collapsing in spectacular fashion. The first sign came through Mrs. Patterson, who called with barely concealed concern. "Joe, honey, I hate to bother you, but Ralph thinks you should know what's happening over there." "What kind of things?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. "Well, yesterday morning, Sandra was outside screaming at the mailman about late bills, and last week, Tyler was seen arguing with some official-looking people on the front porch. The rumor is they're facing foreclosure." The news should have shocked me, but it felt inevitable. Sandra had been living beyond her means for years, relying on my contributions to cover the gap between her expenses and income. Without that financial cushion, the house of cards had finally collapsed. "Has she tried to contact you directly?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Not successfully," I replied, thinking of the dozens of blocked numbers and ignored messages. That afternoon brought confirmation of Sandra's desperation in the form of 66 text messages from various phone numbers, all arriving within a 3-hour window. The progression from false concern to anger to desperation to threats was both predictable and pathetic. "Joe, this is your mother. We need to talk immediately." "Where are you? Your family needs you." "I don't know what lies people have told you, but this has gone too far. You're being selfish and cruel. Your father would be ashamed." "Fine, ignore your family, but don't come crawling back when you realize your mistake." "Joe, please, I'm begging you. Just call me back." The messages revealed Sandra's complete inability to accept responsibility for the situation she had created. In her narrative, I was the villain who had abandoned innocent family members out of spite, rather than the victim of calculated emotional abuse. I screenshot every message for my legal documentation while marveling at the transparency of her manipulation tactics. The emotional whiplash between guilt, anger, and false vulnerability was textbook narcissistic behavior. Marcus found me organizing the evidence when he arrived for dinner. "She's really losing it, isn't she?" "Completely. And the scary thing is, 6 months ago, this might have worked. I would have felt so guilty about her desperation that I'd have rushed over to fix everything." What changed? Therapy, distance, and realizing that helping her always meant enabling her harmful behavior. Wednesday brought an escalation that crossed into genuinely frightening territory. Patricia called me into her office with a grim expression. "Sandra showed up at our building this morning," she announced without preamble. Security had to physically escort her out after she became belligerent with reception staff. My stomach lurched. "What did she want?" "She demanded to speak with you about a family emergency. When they explained you were unavailable, she accused the company of hiding you from your dying mother." "She's not dying," I said flatly. "She's facing foreclosure and wants me to bail her out financially." Patricia nodded. "We figured as much. Security has her photo now and she's been banned from the premises. If she returns, they'll call police immediately." The workplace harassment represented a new level of boundary violation that could potentially damage my professional reputation. Sandra's inability to respect appropriate contexts showed how desperate she had become. That evening, Danny called with disturbing news from his legal contacts. Sandra attempted to file a missing person report claiming you disappeared under suspicious circumstances. The police rejected it after reviewing their records, showing your voluntary departure and subsequent harassment complaints. She tried to weaponize law enforcement. It gets worse. She also contacted Adult Protective Services, claiming you had been financially exploiting elderly family members before vanishing with their money. The accusations were so bizarre and easily disproven that they bordered on delusional. APS had apparently closed the case within hours after discovering Sandra's history of false claims and my documented employment and housing stability. "She's burning bridges she might need later," Danny observed. Making false reports to government agencies creates a paper trail that could hurt her credibility in any future legal proceedings. Friday brought news through the neighborhood network that the situation at Sandra's house had reached crisis level. Tyler had finally secured full-time employment at a warehouse, but his $15 hourly wage could not cover mortgage payments on a house that had been purchased when interest rates and property values were different. Madison had moved out entirely, taking refuge with her boyfriend's family after Sandra's increasing volatility made the household unbearable. She had apparently told neighbors that Sandra spent her days obsessively searching social media and making phone calls trying to locate me. "It's like she's become consumed with finding you," Mrs. Patterson reported during another concerned phone call. "Ralph says she's lost weight and looks terrible, but he also said he heard her telling someone that this is all your fault for being ungrateful." The irony was stunning. Sandra was destroying her health and remaining family relationships in pursuit of forcing contact with someone whose life had dramatically improved since cutting ties with her toxic behavior. Sunday brought the most desperate attempt yet. Marcus and I were leaving the farmer's market when my phone buzzed with a call from the hospital emergency department. "Ms. Joe, this is Linda from Seattle General. We have a patient here who asked us to contact you about her condition." My blood turned to ice. "What patient?" "Sandra Wilson. She's listed you as her emergency contact and she's asking to speak with you about her treatment." The manipulation was obvious but still effective in creating doubt. Had Sandra actually harmed herself to force contact? Was this another false emergency designed to exploit my compassion? "What's her medical condition?" I asked carefully. "I can only share that information with family members or designated contacts. Could you come in to discuss her care?" Marcus was watching my face with obvious concern as I processed the situation. This felt like an elaborate trap designed to force me into direct contact with Sandra in a setting where refusing help would seem heartless. "I'm not her emergency contact," I said firmly. "We've had no relationship for months. You should contact her other children, Tyler or Madison Wilson. She's insisting that you're her primary contact and that she needs to speak with you urgently." "I'm sorry, but I can't help with that. Please contact other family members or social services if she needs assistance." Hanging up on a hospital felt heartless, but I knew Sandra well enough to recognize manufactured crisis designed to circumvent my boundaries. If she were genuinely ill, her other children or emergency services would handle the situation appropriately. Marcus squeezed my hand supportively. That was the right choice. If there were a real medical emergency, they would have contacted you through official channels, not had the patient request specific people. 2 hours later, Aunt Lisa called with confirmation of my suspicions. "I just talked to Tyler. Sandra checked herself into the ER claiming chest pains and anxiety, then demanded they call you. The doctors found nothing wrong and discharged her after a few hours. She faked a medical emergency to try to force contact." "Exactly. Tyler is furious because he had to leave work to pick her up and Madison won't even take her calls anymore. She's alienated both of her children with this obsessive behavior." That night, I sat in my peaceful apartment reviewing the documentation I had accumulated over 4 months. Police reports, workplace incident reports, screenshots of hundreds of harassing messages, and witness statements from family members and neighbors. The pattern was clear. Sandra had escalated from calculated cruelty to desperate harassment to potential stalking behavior, all while refusing to accept responsibility for the crisis she had created. But more importantly, her desperate attempts to force me back into the caretaker role had only reinforced my decision to maintain boundaries. Every manipulation tactic she employed reminded me exactly why leaving had been necessary for my mental health and personal growth. My phone buzzed one final time with a message from yet another unknown number. "Joe, this is Sandra. I know you're reading these messages. I'm about to lose everything, and it's your responsibility as my daughter to help. If you don't contact me within 24 hours, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are." The threat was empty but revealing. Sandra still believed she could control my behavior through intimidation and emotional blackmail. She had not learned anything from months of consequences, instead doubling down on the manipulative tactics that had caused this situation in the first place. I saved the message to my documentation file and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I could sleep peacefully, knowing that Sandra's crisis was not my responsibility to solve. Her breaking point had become my moment of complete liberation from her toxic influence. 6 months had transformed my life beyond recognition, but it was Aunt Lisa's phone call on a quiet Saturday morning in March that marked the true turning point in this long journey toward healing and justice. "Joe, honey, your mother is in real trouble now. She's received official foreclosure papers and she has 30 days to pay $15,000 or lose the house entirely." I was sipping coffee in my sunlit kitchen surrounded by the peace and beauty I had created in my new life. The news should have generated panic or guilt, but instead I felt only a calm sense of inevitability. "How is she handling it?" I asked. "Badly. She's been calling every family member begging for money and claiming this is all your fault for abandoning the family. Most people are refusing to even speak with her anymore." The destruction Sandra had brought upon herself was complete. Her attempts to manipulate family members had backfired, destroying relationships she had spent years cultivating. Her harassment of me had isolated her from potential support systems. Her refusal to accept responsibility had prevented her from making necessary changes. "She asked me to contact you," Aunt Lisa continued hesitantly. "She wants to meet and discuss some kind of arrangement." The request was both predictable and pathetic. After months of threats, manipulation, and harassment, Sandra now wanted to discuss arrangements from a position of complete powerlessness. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "That's entirely up to you, sweetheart. But if you do meet with her, make sure it's in a public place with witnesses. And remember that you don't owe her anything after how she treated you." I spent the weekend discussing the situation with Marcus, Dr. Chen, and my circle of supportive friends. The consensus was clear: any meeting with Sandra needed strict boundaries and realistic expectations about what could be accomplished. "She's going to try every manipulation tactic she knows," Dr. Chen warned during our Monday session. "Tears, anger, guilt, false promises of change. Remember that her primary goal is regaining control, not genuine reconciliation." Tuesday morning, I texted Aunt Lisa my decision. "I'll meet with Sandra once in a public place with you present as a witness. She can explain her situation, but I make no promises about helping." The coffee shop I chose was busy but quiet, with excellent visibility and security cameras. I arrived early and selected a corner table where I could observe Sandra's approach and demeanor. She looked terrible. The confident, controlling woman who had orchestrated my exile had been replaced by someone gaunt and desperate. Her clothes were wrinkled, her hair unkempt, and her eyes held the frantic energy of someone who had lost control of their narrative. But I felt no satisfaction in her obvious suffering. Instead, I experienced a deep sadness for the relationship that could have existed if Sandra had been capable of genuine love rather than narcissistic manipulation. "Joe." She began, her voice shaking with either emotion or calculation. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know things have been difficult between us, but we're still family." The opening was textbook manipulation, immediately reframing our relationship as a mutual conflict rather than acknowledging her abusive behavior. "Sandra," I replied calmly, "I'm here to listen to what you have to say, but let's be clear about why we're having this conversation." Her face cycled through several emotions before settling on practiced vulnerability. "I'm losing the house. Everything your father worked for, everything we built together, it's all going to be gone." The invocation of Dad was particularly manipulative since she knew how much his memory meant to me. But months of therapy had prepared me for exactly this tactic. "The house situation is unfortunate," I agreed. "How did it reach this point?" Sandra's explanation was a masterpiece of deflection and denial. In her version, I had selfishly abandoned my family responsibilities, leaving her unable to maintain expenses she had managed perfectly well before my departure. The financial crisis was entirely due to my betrayal, rather than her decision to remove her primary source of income and maintenance support. I calculated something interesting while preparing for this meeting. I interrupted pulling out a folder I had prepared. Over the 5 years I lived in that house, I contributed approximately $68,000 in rent, utilities, groceries, and maintenance work. Sandra's eyes widened as I spread documentation across the table. Bank statements, receipts, photos of repair work I had completed, and detailed logs of my financial contributions. "The fair market rent for a room in that area is currently $1,200 monthly," I continued. "I was paying $800 plus utilities and groceries, which means I was subsidizing your household by at least $600 every month." "You were living there too," Sandra protested weakly. "You benefited from the arrangement." "I also received no equity in the property, no vote in household decisions, and no protection from arbitrary eviction," I replied. "Which brings us to the real issue here." I pulled out the eviction notice she had presented that October evening, now faded but still legible. "You planned my removal in advance, Sandra. This wasn't an emotional decision or a family crisis. You consulted lawyers, prepared documentation, and orchestrated a deliberate betrayal designed to hurt me as much as possible." The evidence was undeniable, and Sandra's face crumpled as she realized her manipulation tactics were ineffective against someone who had spent months processing the truth of our relationship. "I made a mistake," she whispered, tears beginning to flow. "I was angry about your success and I handled things badly, but you're my daughter, and families should forgive each other." The admission was more than I had expected, but still fell short of genuine accountability. Sandra was acknowledging tactical errors rather than accepting responsibility for emotional abuse. "Here's what I'm willing to do," I said, maintaining calm professionalism despite the emotional weight of the moment. "I'll help with this one financial crisis in exchange for specific conditions." Sandra's desperate hope was almost painful to witness. "Anything. Just tell me what you need. First, you will publicly apologize to every family member you lied to about me. You will acknowledge that I did not abandon, steal from, or mistreat this family in any way." Her face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but she nodded reluctantly. "Second, Tyler and Madison will write formal letters acknowledging their participation in the eviction plan and apologizing for their cruelty." "They were just following my lead," Sandra protested. "They didn't understand the situation. They're adults who made choices. If they want any possibility of future relationship with me, they need to take responsibility for their actions." "Fine, what else?" "Third, you will enter therapy to address the behavioral patterns that created this crisis. Not anger management or family counseling, but individual therapy with a licensed professional who specializes in narcissistic personality disorders." Sandra recoiled as if I had struck her. "I don't have a personality disorder. I'm just a mother who made some mistakes." "Those are my conditions," I stated simply. "Accept them all or handle your financial crisis without my involvement." The silence stretched for several minutes while Sandra processed the reality of her situation. She had expected to manipulate me into unconditional financial support while accepting no responsibility for change. "How much help are you offering?" she finally asked. "Enough to prevent foreclosure this time, but this is the only assistance you'll receive from me regardless of future crises." Sandra's tears were genuine, now reflecting the complete collapse of her worldview. She had spent months believing she could force me back into the caretaker role through manipulation and harassment. Instead, she was learning that respect and support had to be earned through genuine change. "I'll do whatever you require," she agreed finally. "Just please don't let me lose the house." 3 weeks later, the conditions had been met with varying degrees of sincerity. Sandra's public apologies were grudging, but complete, restoring my reputation with extended family members. Tyler's letter was brief, but honest, acknowledging that jealousy and resentment had motivated his participation in my exile. Madison's apology was more thoughtful, including recognition of how my financial contributions had supported lifestyle choices she had taken for granted. Sandra had enrolled in therapy with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a specialist recommended by Dr. Chen. Her initial sessions were reportedly contentious, with significant resistance to acknowledging problematic behaviors, but she was attending regularly. I paid the $15,000 needed to prevent foreclosure money that represented a significant portion of my savings, but felt like a worthwhile investment in finally closing this chapter of my life. The payment came with a legal document establishing clear boundaries and expectations. Any future contact between Sandra and me would be limited to emergency situations involving genuine health crises. She agreed to respect my privacy, my relationships, and my professional boundaries permanently. 6 months later, I stood in the same coffee shop where Sandra and I had negotiated our final arrangement. But this time, I was meeting Marcus to celebrate our engagement. The ring he had chosen was simple and elegant, reflecting his understanding of my preference for meaningful rather than flashy gestures. "Any regrets about helping her?" he asked, knowing the anniversary of my eviction was approaching. "None," I replied honestly. Helping someone who takes responsibility for their mistakes feels completely different from enabling someone who refuses to change. My relationship with Sandra remained distant but functional. She had made genuine progress in therapy, acknowledging patterns of manipulation and control that had damaged multiple relationships. Tyler had found stable employment and was slowly rebuilding his independence. Madison was pursuing a college degree in nursing, having discovered career ambitions beyond retail work. More importantly, I had learned to distinguish between healthy family loyalty and toxic enablement. The difference lay not in the assistance provided, but in the accountability required and the boundaries maintained. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. "Proud of the growth you've shown throughout this process. You've transformed a painful experience into genuine wisdom." That evening, Marcus and I sat on our apartment balcony watching the sunset over the city that had become my true home. The life I had built was exactly what I had dreamed of during those dark October nights in the hotel room, peaceful, purposeful, and filled with people who valued my authentic self rather than my capacity for sacrifice. "What's the most important thing you learned from everything that happened?" Marcus asked. I considered the question, carefully reflecting on the journey from devastating betrayal to empowered independence. I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's toxic behavior. By walking away with dignity, I found my own worth and taught my family that respect must be earned, not demanded. True family supports your growth, not stunts it for their convenience. The lesson had cost me months of pain and thousands of dollars, but it had also given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, build a meaningful life independently, and maintain my values even when others tried to manipulate my compassion. Sandra's attempt to punish me for my success had inadvertently freed me from a prison I had not realized I was living in. Her cruelty had revealed her true character while showcasing my own resilience and strength. As we prepared for bed that night, I realized I felt genuinely grateful for the experience that had once seemed like the end of my world. Without Sandra's betrayal, I might never have discovered my capacity for independence, my worthiness of genuine love, or my ability to maintain boundaries with toxic people. The family that had rejected me for growing beyond their limitations had inadvertently given me the greatest gift possible, the freedom to become who I was meant to be. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for yourself meant walking away from toxic family dynamics? How did you find the strength to prioritize your own well-being over others' expectations? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can share our experiences and support each other through difficult times. I hope my journey reminds you that your worth isn't measured by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how authentically you honor your own values and dreams. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding personal strength. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to choose yourself without losing your compassion for others. Wishing you all the courage to set healthy boundaries and the wisdom to recognize your own incredible worth.